Daniel Mercer saved my life today. It's a sentence I never thought I'd say, not in this lifetime, and certainly not after 20 years of wishing he didn't exist. Standing on that construction platform, 15 stories above the freezing, wind-swept streets of Chicago, I felt gravity finally win its long battle with me. A rusted cable snapped with a sound like a bone breaking, the metal floor shifted violently beneath my boots, and my hand slipped from the icy railing. The wind screamed in my ears as my body tilted into the void. I was dead. I knew it. In that split second, the air felt like ice water in my lungs, and my entire life didn't flash before my eyes, only the face of the man I hated most did. But then, a hand caught me. A grip so violent, so desperate, that it nearly tore my shoulder from the socket. It was a strength born of pure adrenaline, pulling me back from the edge of eternity and slamming my chest against the vibrating metal platform. When I looked up, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, the face staring back at me belonged to the ghost that had haunted my every waking hour. Daniel Mercer. The same man who had been my brother in everything but blood, until the night he shattered my world into a million unfixable pieces. There are some names in life that become ghosts. You don't say them out loud anymore because the very vibration of the letters hurts your throat. But they never really leave your mind. For 20 years, Daniel's name followed me like a shadow I could never escape, even in the darkest rooms of my own house. Even now, standing safe on solid ground, saying it feels strange. It feels like reopening a wound that never fully healed, one that had been festering under the surface for half my life. The truth is, people love to say that time fixes everything. They tell you that years will dull the edge of the blade. But they are wrong. Time doesn't fix betrayal. Time just teaches you how to carry the weight without collapsing in public. For 2 decades, I believed Daniel Mercer had completely rewritten the future I had spent years building with sweat and hope. And the worst part? I built my entire adult identity around that belief. Every decision I made, every bridge I burned, every ounce of cold, calculating anger I carried, it all pointed back to him. Back to that one night when the stars fell out of the sky. But what I didn't know as a 19-year-old kid lying broken in a hospital bed was that the stories we tell ourselves are often just shields for a truth too painful to face. Before the accident, before the silence that stretched across 20 years, Daniel Mercer was my shadow. We grew up on the same cracked pavement of a quiet Ohio town where everyone knew your business before you even did. Summer evenings there had a specific smell, a mixture of freshly cut grass, cheap charcoal smoke drifting from backyard barbecues, and the faint, oily scent of gasoline from the old cars we were always trying to fix in his father's garage. Daniel was the fire in our duo. He was fearless, loud, and possessed the kind of reckless confidence that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. I was the steady hand, the one who looked at the map before we started driving, quieter and more cautious with the world. But somehow, that difference was our strength. We balanced each other perfectly, 2 halves of a whole. By our senior year of high school, life felt like an open road with no stop signs. We were the stars of the football field, the names the local newspapers loved to print in bold ink. Scholarship offers from big universities were starting to pile up on our kitchen tables like trophies. My father was our biggest fan, the man who never missed a single practice, let alone a game. I can still see him standing on the sidelines every Friday night, his face red from cheering, his voice booming over the roar of the crowd. But his support was a heavy, suffocating thing. He didn't just want us to play, he wanted us to dominate every living soul on that field. He was a man who saw life as a series of wins and losses, with absolutely no room for mistakes. I remember him gripping my shoulder after a tough game, his eyes intense and unyielding, reflecting a strange desperation I didn't understand yet. "Winning is the only thing that protects you from being a nobody," he'd say, his voice tight. "If you lose focus for even a second, you lose everything. Don't ever let anyone take your dream away." At the time, I thought it was just a father's passion for his son's success. I didn't realize it was a warning of the obsessive, cold man he became when things finally went wrong. One cold autumn night, just a week before graduation, we sat on the very top of the empty bleachers long after the stadium lights had been turned off. The field was a sea of silent shadows, and the only sound was the wind brushing through the dry, dead grass. Daniel leaned back, staring at the endless stretch of stars, the steam from his breath rising into the dark air like smoke. "No matter where life takes us, man," he said, his voice unusually quiet and somber, "we don't let it pull us apart. Not for football, not for money, not for anything." I remember laughing, thinking he was being overly dramatic. "Deal," I said, reaching out to shake his hand. Back then, I believed promises made under stadium lights were as permanent as the mountains. I didn't know how fast a life could pivot on a single, invisible patch of black ice. The night everything changed started with the highest high we had ever known. We had just won the state championship in a game that people in that town still talk about today. The air was electric, filled with the sound of car horns, shouting, and music pouring from every open window. The celebration was everywhere. Daniel insisted on driving his old, beat-up pickup truck. It was a vehicle that smelled like stale coffee, worn leather seats, and the grease from his father's garage. I remember the rain starting as a thin, innocent mist as we pulled out of the parking lot, laughing about a play from the fourth quarter where Daniel had almost tripped over his own feet. But 20 minutes later, the mist had turned into a freezing downpour, and the country roads had transformed into a dark, slick mirror of black ice. The laughter in the cab died down. Daniel turned the radio off, his hands white-knuckled as they gripped the steering wheel. "Road's getting bad," he muttered, leaning forward to see through the rhythmic, annoying slap of the windshield wipers. Then, out of nowhere, bright, blinding headlights rounded the bend. They were in our lane, moving too fast, like a predator hunting in the dark. Daniel shouted, "Hold on," and yanked the wheel with everything he had. The truck lost its grip on the earth. We spun in a sickening carousel of metal and light. For one terrifying second, we were weightless, suspended in the air as the world flipped upside down. The sound that followed is a sound that has played on a loop in the back of my mind for 20 long years. It was the scream of twisting metal, the crystalline explosion of glass, and a violent, rhythmic thudding as the truck rolled into the ditch. And then, there was the silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, unnatural quiet, like the earth itself had stopped breathing in shock. I remember the metallic smell of leaking fluid and the cold rain hitting my face through the shattered windshield before everything went black. When I finally woke up 9 days later, the world was a blur of white light and the sterile, suffocating scent of a hospital. There was the constant, rhythmic beep of machines and the hiss of oxygen. My left leg was a heavy, throbbing mass of bandages and steel pins. Every breath felt like inhaling cold needles into my lungs. A nurse with tired eyes eventually sat by my bed and delivered the news that felt like a death sentence. The accident hadn't just broken my body, it had systematically dismantled my entire future. My football career was over before it had truly begun. The scholarship offers were being retracted. The life I had spent 18 years preparing for was gone in a single night. But the real trauma didn't come from the doctors, it came from my father. He sat by my bed every single day, but the light in his eyes had been replaced by a mask of bitter, burning rage. The man who once cheered for us now only had poison in his voice. "Daniel did this to you," he told me one evening, his voice a low, dangerous growl that made my skin crawl. He was being reckless. He was showing off, trying to be the hero on the road just like he was on the field. He took your future because he thought he was untouchable. And now he's too much of a coward to even walk through those hospital doors and look at what he's done to you. I asked about Daniel every day for a week, but the answer was always the same silence. The rumors in town said Daniel had been driving like a madman, fueled by the ego of a champion. I lay in that bed for weeks, staring at the ceiling, waiting for a friend who never came. When he left town a few months later, disappearing into the night without so much as a goodbye note, I let my grief turn into a cold, calcified hatred. I decided then that Daniel Mercer was the villain of my story. I moved to Chicago, took a job as a structural inspector where I dealt with cold steel and hard facts, and I buried my past under layers of professional routine and endless, lonely silence. Until today. On that 15th floor, after the adrenaline had faded and the trembling in my hands had almost stopped, we sat in a cramped, quiet coffee shop across from the construction site. The steam from our cups rose between us like a fog. 20 years of silence sat in the booth next to us like an ocean. Daniel looked older, his face lined with the kind of weariness that sleep can't fix. The reckless spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by something heavy, somber, and deeply tired. I finally broke. I spat out the question that had been poisoning my soul for half my life. Why didn't you come to the hospital, Daniel? Why did you leave your best friend to rot while you walked away without a word? Daniel didn't look away. His eyes filled with a pained, haunting clarity. I was there every single morning for 2 weeks, he said, his voice cracking with an emotion he had suppressed for decades. But your father met me at the hospital doors every time. He told me if I ever came near you again, he'd use his influence to make sure I was charged with vehicular assault. He told me you never wanted to see my face again, that the very sight of me made you sick to your stomach. Daniel leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. I tried writing letters, dozens of them, pouring my heart out. I even found out years later that your father had kept them all in a locked drawer in his office, hidden away like they never existed. He didn't want you to know I was fighting for you. He didn't want you to know the truth. He reached into his weathered jacket and pulled out a tattered, yellowed envelope. The police report is in here. The other driver that night was drunk. He swerved into our lane. There was nothing I could have done to avoid him. I tried to tell your father, but he didn't want the truth. He just needed someone to blame for the fact that his son's dream was dead, and I was the only target left standing. The realization hit me harder than the accident ever could. My father, in his obsessive need to control the narrative of my life and protect his own pride, had built a prison of lies. He needed a villain to make sense of the tragedy, so he manufactured one out of my best friend. And I had been a willing prisoner for 20 years, fueling my life with a hatred that was never earned. My father's protection had been the cruelest betrayal of all. We walked out of the shop and into the fading orange glow of the Chicago sunset. The city moved around us, a river of strangers who knew nothing of the 20-year war that had just ended on a sidewalk. Daniel didn't ask for an apology, and I didn't have the words for a grand speech. We stood there for a long moment, two men who had been shaped by the same shattered night. As he turned to leave, he didn't say goodbye. He just reached out and gripped my shoulder, that same firm, steady grip he used to give me on the football field after a tough play. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of everything we had lost, and walked away into the crowd. I stood there for a long time, watching his shadow disappear under the city lights, feeling the warmth of his hand still lingering on my jacket. The weight was finally gone. Not because the past had been rewritten, but because the truth had stripped away the armor of my anger. For the first time in 20 years, the cold Chicago air didn't feel cold at all. The truth is, we often spend our entire lives hating the very people who were trying to save us. We accept the stories others tell us as the absolute truth. But we never stop to ask the person who was actually standing in the fire with us. Hatred is a poison that consumes you from the inside out. But the truth is a light that sets you free from the chains you've been carrying for years. Before you judge someone, before you build a wall of anger around your heart, remember that every story has two sides. Sometimes, the person you believe is the villain of your life, is actually your greatest silent protector. Don't fuel your life with hatred. Because when the truth finally comes to light, all you will be left with is the weight of wasted years. Never wait to speak the truth. And never be too proud to forgive. Because life can pivot in a single second. Just like that patch of black ice, that changed everything.